one of those strange children who knew from an extremely young age that writing was going to be my path in life. Writing, the life on the page to me was more real and more accessible, perhaps, than the life around me, and more comforting. So I disappeared into books. I was the sort of person who'd walk down the street with a book in my hand, reading as I went.
How did this project begin for you, and how did it gradually take shape?
It's always hard for me to think of my poetry collections in a kind of coherent way because I'm so focused on every individual poem that each poem is like its own world. So I'm probably at least halfway through a manuscript before it starts occurring to me that there are themes and that there are, there is a shape to the book. I think because my previous book was so focused on the physical body and how that changes with age, it seemed like a natural thing to move inward and to think about how, the mental landscape also changes as we age.
Chatting with us now, we really appreciate your willingness to find your way to a computer for this interview because you are famous for staying offline as much as possible, and I'm a little jealous of you for that. How has that practice of maintaining distance from technology helped you as a writer?
It has felt really necessary to me as a writer. I know right now in particular, it isn't practical. And I end up having to go through all sorts of contortions to do my work, and not have, internet at home. But I find, I have always found technology a huge distraction to the point where, whatever its gifts it's just not worthwhile for me. Especially with poetry, I really need to focus, and I need to kind of clear my head and clear my little space, my little apartment, and just, sit with the images and the words and the emotions. And, as we all know, technology is the opposite of that focus. It's, you're constantly, there's just so much distraction. There's so much, it's so easy to fritter away your time and your focus on things that are, ultimately they don't give anything back to you. So yeah, it's something I've just known for myself as being really important.
How do you think you've grown as a writer since you published Runaway, Diary of a Street Kid?
Oh my God, wouldn't it be tragic if I hadn't grown? And yet, this is my first book that I published when I was 18 and wrote as a teenager is out of the 13 books, the only one that actually earns royalties. Because even now, 30 years later, people are still reading that book. So I'm like, did I peak at 15? When I was writing my first book, is it all downhill from there? It's ironic, right? Because I think, obviously my work is far more polished, thoughtful, layered, right? Than it was as a teenager who is simply trying to find some kind of catharsis in writing versus trying to create something that is artistic and sculpted. I spend so much time with my lines and my sentences now. And that precision is so important to me as a writer, whereas the first book was really just kind of a blurt, of emotion and experience on the page without any of that artistry. And yet that was what appealed to people because I guess, looking back, there is very little writing by adolescents that truly documents, without any artifice, that experience of adolescent angst and rage, and self-destructiveness, right? I mean, if I were to write that book now, it would be a completely different book.